Welcome back. Global ratings agency Fitch has revised Kenya's economic outlook to negative, firmed its long-term issuer default rating at B due to heightened external financing challenges amid high funding demands, weakening external reserves, among other issues. Joining me now is Matt Kindiger, practice leader, Sub-Saharan Africa Frontier View, joining me now to provide more insight. Great to have you, Matt.
Today.
So do you expect the government to be able to stabilize public finances despite this recent downgrade from Fitch?
Yeah, so Fitch's downgrade is not really surprising. Certainly the government has faced quite significant pressures with its public finances, and they're not in a great state at the moment. But when we look to 2024 in particular, we would expect the government to be able to stabilize its finances eventually. And what this means, or what this looks like ultimately, is we do expect it to avoid it facing debt distress, and therefore we do expect Kenya to avoid a default. And this is because there's been a number of measures being taken by the government at the moment to prevent this from happening. So firstly, we have seen quite significant funding being secured from the World Bank and the IMF, about $2 billion in total over the last couple of months. Also, the government has introduced its quite controversial but arguably fiscally necessary finance bill this year, which does raise taxes and cut spending. So there are a number of measures which are being taken to ensure that Kenya doesn't face debt distress next year and that it can stabilize and consolidate its public finances. But it will be quite a painful period for many Kenyan businesses and consumers and households at the moment. So certainly a bit of a tough time as a result of these measures.
Right, definitely a tough time right there in Kenya. But how long do you expect the cost of living protests in Kenya to last for?
Yeah, certainly. So unfortunately, we would expect these cost of living challenges to continue for the foreseeable future. In other words, probably until the end of this year, but we probably would expect them to be rather cyclical. So what we have seen is the government deciding to clamp down on these protests using the police. However, we don't think the fundamental drivers of the cost of living protests will disappear. And this is because the cost of living probably will get a bit worse before it gets better in Kenya. Mr. Ruto's government is pretty determined to push through with fiscal reforms, raising taxes, cutting spending, but also we are expecting inflation to accelerate in Kenya over the coming months. And this is because the shilling has lost quite a lot of value against the dollar, and it will continue to do so. At the same time, Mr. Odinga, who's really the champion of the opposition protests, cost of living protests, is also quite determined to make a point and raise the issue of cost of living. So certainly we do expect some commercially disruptive cost of living protests and general protests to continue for probably at least the next few months in Kenya.
Right, and what does this mean for the country's economic growth outlook?
So Kenya's economy actually beat expectations to grow above 5% in the first quarter of this year. So it grew above 5% year on year in Q1. But we are expecting it to slow, and it might slow quite dramatically when Q2 data comes out, and especially Q3 and Q4 for this year. And this is because, we are expecting the new Finance Act to really raise taxes, cut spending, and that has been a big, public finances or government spending has been a big driver of growth in the past. Consumer spending is also going to come under a lot of pressure. And there actually has been, at least anecdotally, a reduction in tourist arrivals as a result of the protests in the country in Kenya. So certainly also interest rates are also rising in the country, and this does suppress credit growth to an extent. So we're forecasting growth of about 3.5% this year, which is not terrible, but it's actually not great by Kenya's recent historical standards. 2024, however, is likely to be a much better year for Kenya. So we're forecasting growth of close to 5%. And this is because we do expect investors to become a bit more confident in the government's ability to stabilize public finances. There's likely to be a bit of a tourism rebound. The shilling will probably stabilize next year as well, and this will again support consumer and investor sentiment. So our view really is a bit of a slowdown over the next couple of months and into the rest of 2023, but an improvement likely in 2024.
Right, I guess all hope now just signals to 2024 at this point. Quite a tough start for the Ruto government, definitely. But thank you so much. Always great having your perspective, Matt Kinniger, practice leader, Sub-Saharan Africa Front Review. Thank you.
Thanks very much.